Hi, my name is Katie Bishop, and I'm the District Vice President for TD Commercial Banking here on beautiful Vancouver Island. TD is proud to be a summit sponsor again, and I'm delighted to have the opportunity to introduce today the Accessing Investment Capital session. I'm confident this panel of speakers will provide some excellent insights that will help local businesses grow and flourish over the next number of years. Please take a moment to stop by our TD virtual booth and drop us a line to connect. We'd love to have the opportunity to speak to you about how TD can win your business. Thanks and enjoy the session.
Tanchi, hello. Thank you for joining us for today's session. My name is Dan Hurley. I am chair of the Vancouver Island Economic Alliance, principal of the Hurley Martin Group, and also a proud citizen of the Métis Nation of British Columbia. I want to acknowledge with gratitude that VIEA operates on the traditional territories of the Coast Salish, Nuu-chah-nulth, and Kwakwaka'wakw peoples. And I'm speaking to you today from Gabriela Island on the unceded territories of the Snuneymuxw peoples. This panel session on accessing capital and investment opportunities is a very timely topic, especially during this time of global economic uncertainty and transformation. There is a trend emerging where investors are looking for opportunities to make their money work for the benefit of local and regional economies. How can we take advantage of this trend? And where can we find investment opportunities and investment capital? Here to address these questions today are three distinguished speakers. Christy Fairholm-Mader is co-founding director of Scale Collaborative, and she's joining us from Victoria. Daniel Martinez is partner with Integral Wealth Securities in Nanaimo. And Peter Elkins is with the ESCA Fund, and he is a serial entrepreneur and community economic development thought leader, and he is joining us from Victoria. We welcome you all today. To begin our session, I will ask each of you to briefly introduce yourselves and make some opening remarks. Christy, we'll start with you.
Sure, thanks Dan, and thanks to VIEA for having us today. It's a really exciting and important topic. Just to check, you can hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Perfect, thank you. So we're a Scale Collaborative. Scale Collaborative really looks at supporting enterprising organizations, social purpose organizations, social enterprises to become more financially resilient and to scale and grow in order to achieve greater impacts in their community. And we do this through providing direct consulting support. We do this through capacity building programs such as the Social Venture Bootcamp, Social Enterprise Catalyst, and the Thrive Capacity Building Program. And we also do this through initiatives that are specific around capital and social finance. And we have two that we're working on specifically for this topic today. And one is the Coastal Community Social Procurement Initiative, which I'll touch on later, as well as the Thrive Local Impact Investment Fund. So we work with organizations and businesses that are not really well served by financial institutions and by investors. They tend to be viewed as risky. They might not have collateral. They might be really in early stages and have deep impact outcomes. And so they struggle to access resources to launch and grow. And there is a significant capital gap that is felt by such social purpose organizations, it's felt by women-owned enterprises, it's felt by Indigenous-owned enterprises, it's felt by people of color who own enterprises. That capital just does not flow very well to these types of organizations and businesses, even though they're directly addressing today's challenges. And so, I think then why is this really important when we talk about directing resources towards these types of organizations and these businesses? We have a world and an economy that is struggling and a natural world that is under siege. And so it's time to begin to think about how we're going to do things differently. So the question is that we ask back to investors and to people who are thinking about making a change in the world is, what impact is your money having in the world right now? Is it helping to solve some of today's challenges by investing and purchasing from enterprises that are part of the solution and providing opportunities for all, or is it deepening today's challenges? And impact investing is a growing field of funds that tend to be directed specifically towards either a certain impact area or directing capital towards a group that might not be able to have access to capital, or directing towards local and community economic outcomes. It's really open to accredited investors, to family offices, to foundations, to pension funds, to endowments, and they could all start to invest through these vehicles to create this increased impact. And the social procurement is another way to direct capital intentionally by integrating social and environmental outcomes into public and corporate purchasing and supply chains. So being intentional about how money is invested and spent is a powerful, powerful lever for change. And Scale, our organization's responding to this challenge by launching Vancouver Island-focused impact investment fund called Thrive in partnership with Rise Capital, who is doing impact investing across BC and on Sunshine Coast. and also supporting local governments to direct their purchasing towards impact through the Coastal Community Social Procurement Initiative. And I'm happy to talk more about these as we go through. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Christy. So next we'll hear from Peter.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for having me. This is I'm very honored to both be speaking to your audience, but also being part of the panel with Christy and Daniel, two people I respect greatly in the work they're doing. For me, I come from this as an entrepreneur and a business owner that really discovered community economic development and community service in the last 10 years of my career. And I've been on quite a bit of an odyssey trying to solve some of the more thorny issues that we're dealing with. And part of that was being asked to volunteer for the provincial government as a member of the Emerging Economy Task Force. And that allowed myself and some others to go on a listening tour around the province to hear from associations, individuals, and business owners, as well as public servants and elected officials around economic development and how they saw the future in our province. And three things that really sat with me specifically, but I think others would concur, is around the accessibility to affordable housing or affordable mortgages. Local investing, it was very difficult to unlock investment in local communities. And the other one is it's becoming more challenging to fund our not-for-profit sectors and more complicated to deploy that money, or more competitive. So I've really spent the last year working on those three challenges and coming up with solutions. We have one solution, which is the impact MIC for housing. We have another solution, which is ESCA, which is really focusing on the community commercialization and economic development. And the other one is around succession planning. And I want to say that there's lots of great opportunities for investment in communities, and there's lots of great products. And Christy mentioned one that she's working on, which is also provincial. It's not just on Vancouver Island. And I think we need to start being more curious about these. And so really, I was thinking about this morning, and everything starts at the kitchen table. People can talk about lobbying and talk about all this other stuff, but at the end of the day, it starts at the kitchen table. And I was thinking about, like, what is the algorithm for these communities to really get traction and move forward? And I think, my recommendation is people think globally and act locally. And I know that's been overused for decades, but it really does resonate and make a lot of sense. So, what is a big idea that can scale globally when it comes to economic development, or better yet, community economic development, but can be implemented in the community? And then it really starts at the kitchen table. And I was thinking about that as we were getting started. And, Daniel and Christy and myself, there's three people right there that would show up at a kitchen table to help people work through this in their community. So we have lots of friends, and they have lots of friends. So there's lots of leadership to get the conversation started. And then I think it's really a matter of communities to look to the investors in their community, not to the funding sources, not to the government, to the investors. And then from there, once you have that pool of investors, then you can really analyze things like the different opportunities, different funds, and come up with a bit of a thesis. And from there, it's really going to the local agencies, the Chamber of Commerce, the economic development, the different associations that are specific to industries, as well as your charity, academia, all those different agencies, to really get the conversation started. And once you've kind of come up with that thesis or hypothesis, then I think you can work through the municipal staff, the elected officials, keep refining it before you actually move it forward. And interesting enough, I was advised by our innovation commissioner that really going to the federal government before the provincial government is a good strategy for local communities. So my point is, there is an algorithm, there is a way to move this forward, and I think that we have good products, we have good opportunities, and it's really time for British Columbians to start thinking about local investing. And luckily, with what's going on in the U.S., there'll be more and more interest in bringing money back into our country, both from the public policy side as well as the investment side. So I think we're in good shape, and I think we just need to really get curious about how this is going to work, what the vehicles are, and start experimenting. And again, I'll refer back to Christy that they have a model up and running that that can keep growing. So let's shine some light on some of these good ideas. And thanks for having me.
Thank you, Peter. Daniel, over to you.
Thank you, Dan, and thank you for the initial introduction. I won't talk much about myself. I'm an investment advisor with Integral Wealth Securities, and the reason I suspect I was invited to this panel is because my office, between my business partner and myself, we have raised over $80 million for local investments. What I want to spend most of my time during these opening remarks is sharing with you why I truly believe that the time is right to push for more local investments. And for that, I can speak to my recent experience as an investment advisor, in which I found when investors are presented with the opportunity to invest in a local business without sacrificing their expected rate of return, they tend to choose local. Add to that a tangible benefit to the local communities or the environment, and investors might even consider a lower return because they understand that their money is invested for the greater good. Now, why am I suggesting that the time is right? Well, let me provide you some context. The typical investor in Canada will have what we refer to in the industry as a balanced portfolio allocation to publicly traded investments. In other words, some money going into bonds and some money going into stocks. The expectation of returns for these two asset classes, stocks and bonds, is quite low going forward. And it is not me the one suggesting that the expectation of return is low. Vanguard, for example. Vanguard is the largest provider of mutual funds and the second largest provider of exchange-traded funds in the world. They administer over $6 trillion and they expect that the returns for the next 10 years will be, and pay close attention to this, for bonds, 0 to 1% per year. Canadian and US stocks, 5 to 7% per year. Now let's just assume the midpoint. Take half of 1% for bonds and 6% for stocks. Blended into a 50-50 allocation into stocks and bonds, the result is 3.25% return per year for the next 10 years, and that's before fees. So the question is, can we do better than that with an allocation to local and or impact investments? And I seem to believe we can. If anything, the rate of return to beat has never been as low. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm well aware of the difference between the risk of a Government of Canada bond and the convertible debenture that FoodX out of Vancouver just issued 3 weeks ago. But the government bond will pay half of 1% per year, and that return won't make the cut for my retirement plans. I'm under the impression that many will consider FoodX's option because of what the economists refer to as information asymmetry, where we have the advantage of knowing how things are going with the company simply because of the proximity of our proximity to that business. If you, like me, have noticed an increased amount of spot delivery trucks, you can assume that the business is doing well. Now, continuing with why I believe the time is right, is another benefit to our cost is that the largest investment firms in Canada are spending big money into marketing their ESG funds. These are the environmental, social, and governance factors that money managers will weigh before making an investment in a publicly traded company. This is of a benefit because investors will start asking more and more questions, and the hope, or at least my hope, is that there is more and more conversations about investing in the right businesses. Now, if you want my opinion about these publicly traded ESG mandates, I do believe that the final product is falling short of expectations. And for that, I can give you a specific example, which I run with my students at Vancouver Island University. I always say, think of 3 businesses that you would not expect to see in any of the leading ESG mutual funds. And I guarantee you, 2 of those names will be Canadian Natural Resources and Enbridge. Now, I invite you to look at some examples of these ESG funds, and I can quote a couple of examples: the RBC Vision Canadian Equity Fund and the NEI Canadian Dividend Fund, 2 fairly popular ESG funds, and the former includes Enbridge and TransCanada among their top 10 investments, and the latter includes Enbridge and Canadian Natural Resources. Now, let me be clear. I just chose these 2 funds randomly. I have nothing against them. And it's very likely that you will see also these companies in any of the other ESG mutual funds in Canada. I'm not suggesting as well that these funds are misleading. I just use these examples to prove a point. What most investors understand as ESG is not really what the ESG filter actually is. Now, just to summarize my opening remarks, I think it's great timing. Lots of investors' appetite for this type of investment. The required rate of return is low, lower than ever before. There's a big push from large investment firms towards socially responsible investments, which should attract investors' attention to our cause. And as they say, don't let a good crisis go to waste. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Daniel. So we have about 20 minutes or so to get into a conversation amongst the panelists here before we turn it over to our audience online. And for those of you that are watching online that already have some questions or comments, we ask you to write those into the chat box at the bottom of your screen, and I'll be curating those. And the latter half of our session here today, we'll be getting to those questions. But I have a few questions to start off with, and to get into a conversation with our panelists. So I'm going to go back to something you said, Peter, around creating a kitchen table, because that really is a good image in my mind. And in a sense, this is sort of a kitchen table right here with our panelists and the people who've joined us today. But the key question here at the beginning is, how do we create the conditions or the forum to encourage investors here on Vancouver Island, in the Vancouver Island region, to put their dollars or to consider putting their dollars into our local community? So, Peter, why don't you open the conversation up on that?
Yeah, so what comes to mind right away for me is collaboration. And so, here's a collaboration between, 3 organizations that all have a similar offering to the same client. So I think we're all at the early stage of this, so collaborating is really important. We all are approaching it from a different place and a different scale. So I think that makes collaboration easier. I think drawing people into that kitchen table just with curiosity is really important. I mean, that's another word that really sticks for me is, be curious. And, and the reason I use kitchen table is because I think finance is very intimidating for all of us for a bunch of reasons. And it's also overwhelming, and it's also risky because we're predicting the future. So I think, really getting people around that kitchen table to start the conversation. And we have an example here in Victoria that's now in Vancouver called Women's Equity Lab. And it's a group of high net worth accredited investing women that are putting in a very small amount of money, which becomes a large pool of money when they invest it. And they're learning about private equity investing as a group. And so there's another really great example of a kitchen table, and that could be duplicated in any community in the province. And then it's really from there they can scale to the different levels of investing or funds. And there's a reason why you direct invest versus funds, and what kind of funds, private, public. So those are the kind of things it's not that complicated to understand once you're curious. And I really encourage people to start asking those questions.
So, Christy, collaborative is right in the title of your firm. How do you want to respond to that question?
Yeah, I think collaboration is critical. I mean, we're looking at trying to create a really significant shift in culture around understanding where money is going and how it's, what's the impact it's creating in the world, that it's not just about financial returns, but we talk about impact returns as well. So, and I like how Peter talks about curiosity. And so we also really encourage people to go with curiosity to find out, what is your money doing in the world? Where are you invested? How do you begin to have those conversations about directing funds towards your local and impact? And there are lots of very cool things that are happening in impact investment funds, in terms of people coming together to invest. There's investment co-ops. There's lots of models that are emerging that are trying to create some of this shift and to provide solutions for folks. I also really put a big shout out to the credit union sector. On our island, we have some really great credit unions, and so being able to bank and put your money locally is also a really important way of being able to direct your funds into local investment. So thinking through those choices and thinking about how you do that, and then the sector itself, the investors being able to collaborate is, Women's Equity Lab is a great example, and also the funds that are emerging. They all tend to be right now fairly small funds, so they're in the early stages of growing, and so there's a lot of collaboration across the impact investment fund sector right now to really learn and grow and try to figure out ways that we can together create the sea change that's required.
And Daniel, of course, you've been working at this as an investor yourself and with your partner. So how do you respond to that question?
Yeah, well, I'm of the belief that the interest from investors is there. I suppose the barrier in many cases is how. And one thing that we have to acknowledge if we're looking at, or if we're trying to attract big money, is that the vast majority of the assets under administration in Canada are held with the big bank brokerage firms. And while they support communities where they are located through sponsorship and donations and so on, they unfortunately don't have local investments available to their investors. And I'm referring to the brokerage side specifically, not the bank itself, because the bank arguably does invest locally by lending money to individuals and businesses. To be precise, why I don't think it would make sense for an advisor in that channel to encourage an investment that he or she can sell is because, if $1 million under administration leaves the door to be invested locally, that means roughly $10,000 less in revenue to the advisor. So my point is that unfortunately, one of the barriers preventing from more allocation to local investments is the fact that there are conflicting interests at play here. And I honestly don't have the answer to that, but I do truly believe that the interest is there, and even a little bit of marketing surrounding local investment opportunities tends to attract a fair amount of attention. In my own experience, we put an ad in the paper, held a session about investing in local real estate at the Nanaimo Golf Course, and we ended up with more people that we have chairs available.
And that's fascinating. So I'd like to now move on to a question about some specific examples, and so that's a very good example. But Christy, maybe we go back to you, because in your opening remarks you talked about some examples of some funds and other initiatives that are underway. So let's dive a little bit into that. Christy, do you want to start that?
Yeah, absolutely. I can talk about a few different funds. And so, I don't represent these funds, so I'm just going to talk about the ones that I've partnered with and had great conversations with, and I'm really inspired by the work that they're doing. So we are partnered with VIEA Capital, and VIEA Capital is a fund that came out of the Sunshine Coast and partnering with the credit union and community futures there. And they do an equity fund, they do a debt fund, they do a community investment co-op. So they have a few different vehicles of which they're investing for impact across BC. So they started on the Sunshine Coast and now are expanding across BC. And part of what they're doing is they're partnering and supporting other local investment funds. So that's where our fund, the Thrive Vancouver Island Impact Investment Fund, is developing in partnership with them. There's another one in the Okanagan called Lime. And there's another one in the Yukon that's developing. So these are beginning to pop up across the country. And we're part of a network of about 25 funds that are being supported through what's called the Solutions Finance Accelerator to develop and grow and to be able to get to the point where we're able to be sustainable and invest ongoingly into our community, which is where we see a significant gap. The other one that I think is important to really draw attention to is the Raven Indigenous Capital Partner Fund, and that's investing in Indigenous communities across Canada. It's located, their head office is both here in Victoria as well as in Vancouver, and they're doing great work. They just got $1 million investment from the SFU's endowment. And so again, filling that capital gap for Indigenous communities and Indigenous entrepreneurs specifically. There's other ones, I think, like CEO is an interesting model where they're investing in women entrepreneurs and women-led businesses. And they're global, and they started in Ontario and have moved globally. And they really use more like the Women's Equity Lab kind of approach, where women come together, they put a bit of money in, And then they provide mentoring and support. And I would say, like, all of these funds, what's one thing that's really unique about a lot of impact investment funds is they do provide capacity and coaching and hands-on support to the enterprises that they invest in. And then our fund Thrive is going to invest in social purpose enterprises, and along whether they're nonprofits, charities, co-ops, or for-profit social ventures, impact aligned, deep impact in bringing forward revenue-based financing tools, as well as equity-like debt. So they can't take equity, but we can structure debt in a way that works like equity, so it gives them that patient and flexible capital. So those are some of the examples I have. You can go to SVX. It has a big site where there's lots of those local impact investment funds. There are other amazing and great examples. There's more conferences. SOCAP's coming up, which is Social Capital Partners, or it's Capital Networks. I don't know. It's big. I don't know what the acronym is, but it's really shows the strength and the growth of what's happening in this area.
Peter, how about you?
Yeah, a couple of things come to mind for me. One, I just want to mention that there's a professor in the business school, Basma, excellent person, really a champion on Vancouver Island. She's working on developing a platform to connect investing and investors, specifically to Vancouver Island. So that's a project that'll come out at some point that'll be helpful. I also want to talk about what Daniel's saying, because I think Daniel, I admire him for bringing that up, considering he's in the wealth management business. So he's kind of throwing himself out there. So that's, true leadership. But one of the bottlenecks that we're going to face on the scale part of this is really around giving something to the wealth management community to actually, so they can keep working and keep benefiting and keep helping people. So that's actually, I would say, the next big piece to work on, is to figure out how to integrate the wealth managers. And I think Daniel has got so much expertise in that, and he made some super valued points around how these institutes work and function, that they're just not scaled to the local. So we have to build product at the local level that will scale to them, and they can partner when it's appropriate. The other thing I wanted to say is around what Christy was saying, just to add some context to that. Why that's a great idea is that the back office fees are expensive, and none of these funds could afford them on their own. So as the expertise in somewhere like RISA grows to run the back office, then it's really partnering with these different communities to do that. So that's an excellent idea. And then another piece around collaboration. The system teaches entrepreneurs to go to investors and ask for money, but the truth is, investors talk to other investors. So everybody talks to other investors to find out. So I know exactly who Christy's talking to. I talk to those partners all the time about what they're looking at, what their deal flow is, what they're investing in. And once they've chosen and gone through the due diligence process, they're now coming to their investor friends saying, this is a good investment. Would you like to syndicate or invest in it? So collaboration from the money deployment side, especially in the private equity world, is always there. And it's actually global. It's not just local. Like there's a lot of sharing of that deal flow. And then I think for me, really where I want to fit into this ecosystem, and it's interesting because all investment funds have a thesis. It's really in their governance. We're trying to figure out how to get at the artisan, the non-entrepreneur, the artisan before they even have revenue. And that's really what ESCA is. So we believe, or our thesis is, that we want to take an idea and an artisan, and I don't mean, a potter, I mean anybody that's good at a skill, that has an idea, and actually bring business people to that idea and funding to get them to the point where Daniel or Christy or other people that have funds would actually be able to invest in them, because their thesis wouldn't be that risky. And currently in Canada, I would say almost 100% of that work is being underwritten by the federal and provincial governments, and it's not effective and it's not working. And so we really want to prove out a new model, because we think commercialization needs to be in the community, and the academia and the federal government, the way they commercialize, really needs to be reversed. So we want to prove that model out. So that's where we've removed the concept of entrepreneurship, because Canada's got a lot of artisans and a lot of business people, and we want to match them. So we fit in at the very early stage.
Daniel?
Yes, when it comes to specific investments, I think local funds or local investments, I think on the real estate front, we're very well covered. There are several options on Central Island. We have All Island Equity, we have 460 MIG, Victoria has Fishguard. There's plenty of options when it comes to real estate. My experience on the direct investment into local businesses is that it is fairly restrictive. So the idea of a fund is probably the best option. We have been part through our office of funding companies like Good Nature Products, which is based out of Vancouver, involved in the manufacturing of plant-based plastics. We have also supported EVI Now, based out of Victoria, which is involved in consumer electronics. We have funded Numinous right here in Nanaimo, which was recently licensed by Health Canada to produce and extract psilocybin from mushrooms. But in all those cases, you were required to be an accredited investor, which means someone that makes more than $200,000 in income or that has liquid assets in excess of $1 million, not including real estate. So as one of my clients who wanted to invest in this plant-based plastics company said, he was sad that a potential source of wealth is essentially limited to the wealthy. And those are his own words. And I don't see that regulation changing anytime soon. So the fund might be the best option to bypass those restrictions.
Thank you. So just a reminder to those watching us today and participating in this session, we're going to take a couple of more questions here, and then we're going to go to yours. So please put your questions or comments into the chat function at the bottom of your screen, and we'll get to as many of those as we can. My next question really has to go back to, we've heard some examples here in terms of what we would consider to be underrepresented groups or peoples in the investment market. So women, Indigenous peoples, Black and people of color. So we've heard some examples here of where there's some emerging success, but I'd like to hear from each of you, what more can we collectively be doing as businesses, as communities, and investors to welcome everyone to that kitchen table and to be able to really focus on making the investment climate more equitable. Daniel, maybe we can start with you on this one.
Sure. Thank you, Dan. I think inevitably there will be some funds that with specific mandates that would invest in women entrepreneurs, Indigenous entrepreneurs, and other visible minorities. I must give credit to some of the largest investment firms in Canada, which already have put together some mandates that specifically invest in these underrepresented sectors, and they do it through publicly traded securities. My personal bias initially, as we're trying to come up with these, new funds and new investment alternatives to investors, is not to impose a specific quota, at least in the beginning, because we're encouraging investors to effectively try a new type of investment, and we want to leave as much flexibility or discretion in the hands of the investment managers. My perception is that already existing impact investing funds have already bought into the idea of, or the concept of equal opportunity, just simply part of their DNA.
Christy, maybe we can go to you next.
Yeah, I would say, it is still incredibly shocking, like how little capital flows to women and to people of color. So the majority of capital does not, like so small. And not only that, like less than 1% flows to funds that are managed by women and by people of color. And so I just really encourage, like if we want to talk about equity, is that investments have an equity lens on, that you begin to ask the questions. You ask about living wage, you ask about ownership, you ask about governance, and make investment decisions based on that, and have that be transparent and open, and to seek out those funds that are managed and operated by women and by people of color, and make a concerted effort to support them to grow, to invest in them, to support them to do the work, because it's not just about who gets the money, it's also about the choices behind the decisions around the investments. And so by making that equitable and by flowing money through women, they're more likely to see products and services that women are bringing forward in a really advantageous and investable kind of light. So I think that that's a reality, and the way that we have to do is begin to start asking questions, getting curious, and making those decisions intentionally.
Peter.
I think start really using your values to drive your investment decisions. I'm neither Indigenous, a person of color, or a woman, so I do believe in the kitchen table model. So for me, it's really asking people what they want. And I'll give you an example. With the Impact MIC product, we ended up collaborating quite a bit with the Aboriginal Housing Authority in British Columbia, which is a standalone organization similar to BC Housing for Indigenous populations throughout the province. And again, not coming from those communities, what I learned was the majority of Indigenous people live off reserve and don't have access to mortgages, even though the issues I was hearing from the bankers was they were trying to do mortgages on Indigenous reserves. And so that was a really interesting opportunity to say, oh, well, then how do I help you start your own mortgage investment corporation that can lend money to Indigenous people off reserve, and they can manage and run it. And to me, that's the kitchen table. So there's a provincial-wide initiative, a large organization, and it was really coming together around the kitchen table to say, how can I bring my knowledge to your knowledge and create a solution? So that was a good example. And so connect those dots.
And just on that related topic, we've got a session tomorrow starting at 8:30 on Indigenomics and reconciliation, and I'll be moderating that one, but it's very much along that line. So encourage you to participate in that one if you can. Next question has to do with the role of governments. So not only the senior levels of government that have their funding and their regulatory power, but I think there's a lot of people who are attending our session today and our summit who are from municipal and regional governments. And so what kind of role do those organizations have to help foster a climate for investment? And maybe more specifically, what can they be doing in things like procurement to help encourage a positive climate for this? Peter, maybe I go to you first.
Yeah, I'm going to let Christy talk about the procurement side, because I think she really is the expert in that, but I support what she's saying 100%. So working or volunteering around the provincial government on the task force gave me the opportunity to see behind the curtain. And I can tell you what the government does exceptionally well at the municipal, provincial, and federal level is to connect people and put people together. We're working on exploring bringing technology to British Columbia from Sweden. And I had to go through a friend in the government to an ADM to a director to a manager, but by the time I got to the manager, he's an expert in shellfish, and really was just the best person we could have ever come across to talk to about what we're doing. So convening and connecting is really their superpower. I think when it comes to investing, it's very difficult because of politics and expertise and lobbying. So I really believe that you need to almost don't look to the government for leadership. Look for them as a third partner in the tri-sector solution. So it really starts at the kitchen table. The investors go to the municipality can go to the federal or the provincial government and move it that way. So I encourage people to not start there, but actually get something up and running. And you'll see that with funds that other people have already started. I won't be surprised at all if the province allocates funds to those and lets someone else manage them. And they are currently working on a $500 million deployment, looking at the strategic investment fund out of somewhere like Ireland. So there is money coming, but at the end of the day, I think it will be fund to funds, which will really help these smaller funds grow. And then my advice to the provincial government is to actually offset the back office fee, whether it's through a grant or directly running a back office, because that's really one of the biggest challenges for these smaller funds is to pay for their back office, pay for that.
Daniel, your thoughts?
Yes, well, I would expand the question to not only what governments can do, but also university endowment foundations, community foundations, assets, and so on. And I think collectively they can do a lot. Think about this. If you add up the assets under administration that BCI, the investment manager for all public pensions in the province, has, plus university endowments, plus community foundation endowment funds, you come up with a number in excess of $180 billion, maybe more. But I'd say on the conservative side, you're talking about $180 billion, which is money from British Columbians that is being invested somewhere. I think there is evidence that they have made substantial investments in real estate, but I'm not certain what other types of investments they have made outside that real estate. I see steps in the right direction. Take Vancouver Island University's endowment fund, for example. They put an RFP last year through which they were looking to allocate 10% of their funds to alternative investments. And one of the filters for those firms competing was access to local investments. It may be a very simplistic view of the problem here or the challenge in front of us, but in terms of the government, what they could do, they can put in a room the CEO of BCI, the directors of investments for the UBC Endowment Fund, the Vancouver Foundation's Endowment Funds, the Victoria Foundation Endowment Fund, and UVic's Endowment Fund. And, right there, you're getting close to the $180 billion that I mentioned. And I would ask them to get involved in a local fund where they would commit X amount of dollars to make it happen. I support Peter's idea that the government would have to subsidize the back office, the startup of the fund, but I don't think money is the issue. It's simply making sure that those large pots of money find their way into these local and socially responsible investments in the province.
And Christy, over to you, and then we'll turn it over to the audience.
Thank you. Great points, Daniel and Peter. Just to build on that, the federal government is going to roll out the social finance fund of $755 million in the next little bit with the aim to leverage private investment. And I think Peter mentioned that a little bit in terms of looking at fund of funds. I think that's an opportunity and a way that, maybe the BC government can match or be a part of. That would be helpful. Thank you for support to the back end of small funds. It's a heavy load to lift on the kind of scale that we operate at. So support for those kind of things is really essential. And at the local government level, they have lots of barriers to they're not really allowed to invest locally. So there's some structural barriers. They only have small limited choices about how they invest. And they tend to put their money in very low return vehicles. And Daniel talked about that earlier about how low return vehicles. And so the opportunity for them who are close to community to be able to invest in local communities is a real values alignment, but with some system barriers in place. In terms of procurement, we talked about investment. I just want to draw awareness to how procurement is another significant source of capital that exists in public and institutional purchasers across Vancouver Island. So with the local governments, they spend $1.7 billion annually on goods and services collectively. And so that's every year that they do. And so social procurement begins to look at, well, how do you begin to direct that spend towards community outcomes, towards employment benefits, towards training and apprenticeship opportunities to be able to capture some community benefits. So instead of purchasing from Amazon, you're saying, how do we begin to direct that spend towards our local economy for community outcomes? And it's a really, really powerful tool anytime, especially now in COVID times, to be able to intentionally look at how that kind of capital is also going into our economies and supporting not only local economies, but really integrating outcomes into that spend. So so I would just say both of those sides, investment and procurement, are real opportunities.
Well, thank you all for this really engaging conversations. Lots to think about here. So at this time, we're going to turn it over to some questions that have been coming in through the session. All right. Well, our first question comes from Alana. What investment industries are you targeting on Vancouver Island? Who would like to go first on that one? Peter, what about you? How about we start with you?
Hi, everyone. Yeah, great question. For me, agriculture and food tech are our current focus, but we're also interested in education, healthcare, conservation, and real estate.
Christy, to you?
Yeah, so we're interested in social purpose organizations, so organizations whose businesses are designed specifically to generate a social, environmental, or cultural impact. So we're more interested in how they define impact, what their goal is, what their aims are, and also really directing capital towards co-ops, towards nonprofits, charities, and social ventures. So being able to also expand the investment spectrum into community-owned entities and governing models.
And Daniel, what industries are you looking at?
Well, we have a lot of exposure to real estate and continue to raise capital for real estate. I think that's a widely available opportunity. But we have, as I mentioned before, we have invested in consumer electronics. Certainly, tech and innovation is a big industry to invest, particularly here on Vancouver Island. Aquaculture with Cascadia Seaweed, we've been looking into that and helping them as much as we can. And we've also funded cannabis and psychedelics in the past 12 months.
So coming back to aquaculture and shellfish, that is a specific question we have here. What's the average ROI and expected payback period for your group of investors who are interested in shellfish and aquaculture? Daniel, do you want to start?
Well, I'd say for us, it's a brand new opportunity. As I said, we're currently working with, or not officially working, but supporting Cascadia. And I've been personally impressed with the appetite that there is for this type of investment. Again, the local part sells, itself. But I've been part of a few conversations with some of the largest private equity funds, and they like the idea. In terms of ROIs, I don't think there has been a specific conversation around that, but I think everyone understands that as an alternative source of nutrition and potential benefits to the environment, just on those two variables make it an attractive industry to be part of.
The other, Christy, Peter, do you want to respond to that? We can also move on to the next question.
Yeah, I just wanted to add to that. So I think that question's from Eric. What's the average ROI expected payback for aquaculture? I think that's a big question. So if you're looking for private investment, they're looking for, obviously a 10x return. Most of them are getting a 3x return. They're looking for a 5-year exit strategy. Most of them will expect a 10-year exit strategy. So that's a pretty big question to not have more details. But those are kind of basic metrics of venture capital. It's the 3 and 10x. Mm-hmm. So I hope that helps. But
great. Okay. Well, Christy, anything to add there?
Yeah, I would say the kind of returns that we're looking at, we're not focusing specifically on shellfish and aquaculture. The kind of returns are everywhere from repayable grants to what we call concessionary capital. So this is a very low below market return to, we say, modest returns, which is sort of like in the 3 to 6% return for investors.
All right. Our next question has to do more with in the area of Indigenous business or Indigenous funding sources. So this question, seeking an introduction regarding a Métis co-invented auto fire suppression technology. The goal is a national manufacturing facility on sovereign lands wherein employment and sustainability can be created. So any suggestions about potential funding sources for that business idea?
Yeah, I think the New Chalmette Economic Development Corporation is doing some great work on island and supporting Indigenous entrepreneurs. As I mentioned, Raven Indigenous Capital Partners is also providing investments into Indigenous entrepreneurs. And then there's a new fund that I've seen coming up that's kind of under the banner of what's called New Market Funds. And they're also looking at investing specifically in Indigenous enterprises. So I would recommend checking any of those out.
Any other thoughts?
I'm not aware of any specific fund. I mean, I've heard of Raven through Christy, and that's how I know of them. But I don't know of anything specific. But if the business idea has, is worth looking into, I'm more than happy to have a chat with this person after the session.
Peter?
Yeah, I was just going to say again, these questions are opening up more questions. They're hard to answer without more information, but there are two services. One with three services, local economic development. So again, I don't know where this person is located, but something like Innovation Island would be a good place to start. And then obviously the provincial and federal government, the concierge service with the federal government. Part of this, might require some IRAP funding. I don't know how far along they are, if they have sales. But I would say those are some good places to start. So really, it's kind of, again, it's hard to answer without more information.
Well, on that point, a reminder that we do have a roundtable organized starting at 4:30. So those of you that do want to join us for that, and I hope our panelists will be able to join us as well. We can get into some more specific questions around some of these points that have been brought up. Next question is, what are the requirements for island companies to be funded by Solutions Finance Accelerators funding? Now, they also are asking either through yourself, Daniel, or Peter, and of course, Christy as well, you can weigh in. So Daniel, any thoughts about Solutions Finance Accelerators funding?
I'm not familiar with that. I suspect Peter or Christy would be better suited to answer that question.
Okay. Peter?
Again, I'm not sure what the question is.
Sure, I'll answer it because I mentioned it.
Okay, go ahead, Christy.
The Solutions Finance Accelerator was a large foundation called the McConnell Foundation that wanted to support local impact investment funds. So they put a call out asking for people who had local impact investment fund or impact focus, like a specific sort of area focus investment fund to be able to apply. And Vancouver Island, our fund, was one of a few that were accepted into that program to help us with some of those startup costs that we talked about earlier, to get going and to put some legs underneath that. And so I'm not sure when they're going to post another call for that.
That's great.
So I'm reading the question again. So yeah, I have a better answer for you now. So the Solutions Finance wouldn't be available to what Eric's asking for. What the way I read his question is, what's the criteria for him to engage us in funding, whether it's one or all of us. So my answer to that is that it really starts with a conversation, and depending on where you are in the stage of the business, if it's an idea, if it's got revenue, then that's really where it starts. So.
Thank you for reading the question, Peter. Thanks. I didn't read us how to answer that question too. Thank you for asking the question. For us, we're going to be there's some revenue that's been created that it's impact aligned would be what we're looking for, and that we're looking for that early stage revenue to growth. And we have specific areas of where we see capital gaps that we're going to seek to fill. So we'll be asking those questions like, where else can we support you to access capital, but where else can we fill to make that easier? So when we sort of go out there, well, check out websites and look and for a call, we're currently in capital raising. So we won't be deploying for a little bit.
All right, we're going to move on to the next question. What's the most intriguing investment vehicle you've seen lately that seems a little out there, but could hold promise? Sort of the social impact bond for the new decade. Who would like to start on that one? What is the most intriguing investment vehicle you've seen lately that seems a little out there, but could hold promise?
I'd say anything that I've come across lately is because of Christy and Peter, so I won't steal their ideas on my end. I've been doing some due diligence on a fund based out of Vancouver called Active Impact. I've been pretty impressed with the results so far. Fund 1 was closed months ago. They're doing some exits there, and they're going to raise $50 million for Fund 2. And it's pretty interesting the type of businesses they are investing in. They have just over half in Canada and the rest of them in the US, but that's nothing out of the ordinary when it comes to just a pure private equity fund, but investing locally, sustainable companies and so on. But doing pretty interesting things, uncovering very, very good stories.
Anything else to add? We have a few more questions, but anything else to add on that one?
Yeah, I'm going to add the most interesting thing that's come out as a vehicle in the last 24 months is called a rolling fund. And I think most small funds will be going to a rolling fund in the near future. And it comes out of AngelList in the US. There's a gentleman that used to work for the Royal Bank in Impact Investing, David in Toronto. He started the first Canadian rolling fund, but he's tech-centric. But anybody that's looking for a vehicle, I would say the rolling fund's the most interesting one to get your hands on, and it's spreading quickly. I have a colleague in Sweden; they're trying to bring it there right now. So that's number one, and then non-vehicle, but just an interesting thing for the economic developers. Women's Equity Lab is based on a model out of Bend, Oregon. It's called Bend Ventures. And it's actually called event-based financing. So that's where that all stems from. And so we took the idea from Bend and refined it down to what would work in Canada and what would work locally. But it's actually called event-based financing. So anybody doing community economic development looking for private equity vehicles, that's the one. And anybody looking to start a vehicle or looking at the best way to do it, I'd say is rolling funds, if you're looking for innovation.
Christy, anything to add there?
We've been really interested in revenue-based financing. So, and again, just trying to find those ways to provide equity-like debt and revenue-based financing, I think is going to be, it's done a lot in the States, but have seen it done less here. And then the other area that I think is interesting that again has done lots in the States, but is struggling to gain some traction here is program-related investments, which are specific to foundations and granting organizations that allow them to shift their money deeply for impact, but use it as an investment. And there's some strange barriers that exist here, but if we can remove those barriers, again, we're able to unlock really impact-aligned capital towards great initiatives and projects that need more forgiving and more patient capital. So I'd like to see those two become a little bit more used regularly.
All right, we have about a minute or so left, and I'll try to get to a question or two. So if you quickly respond, with the many businesses that have been put out of business by COVID, what about investing to rescue them? The idea of businesses helping to support those that are close to or have been put out of business. Any quick thoughts?
I feel nervous about having businesses in crisis go into debt. To manage that, I think that the response that's required is government grant and intervention and support for those businesses. And so I would really want to make sure that they had the right capital that did not leave them in a worse off state than when they started, but allowed them to stay and hold a steady state that then as COVID settles out or we begin to understand the new normal, they're then able to adapt to the situation at that point.
Peter or Daniel?
Yeah, I think just to follow up on something Christy said about revenue-based financing. So really these companies that have been put out of business by COVID, not going out of business, I think they all need to be assessed. Some of them could be merged. Some of them really just need a different business model. They might be retail only with no digital. They're not digital native. So there's lots of reasons. So yeah, I think they need to be assessed for sure. I think there is vehicles like revenue-based financing that would work well for the ones that were able to to pivot their business model or change how they're doing business. But yeah, I think they're worth looking at. I certainly would look at them.
Daniel, final thought to you.
Oh, same as echoing Peter and Christy's comments. I think kind of like making blanket statements that all of those businesses could be rescued. At the end of the day, they have to be investment worthy, right? And then that's the assessment I believe that Peter referred to, right? If there's mergers, if changing business models and so on is necessary, then their business possibly was inevitably going to end with COVID or without COVID. But there's very valuable businesses that are worthy of investment money.
So Dan, I'll give you a crazy example.
Yep, very quickly.
The tourism is in big trouble. Why aren't we opening up to the world saying this is a place where you can come and do your remote work from, and open up the communities in the hotel sector and the tourism sector to remote workers? So I think there's lots of opportunity to recover once people get over the shock and start thinking about solutions.
Well, as a new remote worker, I couldn't agree more. There's great opportunity there. So thank you very much to everyone. Now, as a reminder, we do have roundtables planned starting at 4:30. There were some people who had some very good questions and probably want some more time with our panelists. So do join us, go to your agenda and click on the link for the roundtables. I want to thank our panelists. I want to thank our sponsor, TD, for supporting the summit and this session in particular. And a final note, each of our panelists are going to receive a special gift from St. Jean's Cannery Smokehouse. So you will eat well as invest well on Vancouver Island. So thank you very much, everyone, and enjoy the rest of the summit.